So this is part two of lexical semantics, and we'll talk a little bit about word sense disambiguation. So natural language semantics, as a reminder, is concerned with the meaning of language. So when we talk about lexical semantics, like we did in lecture 12, we were concerned mostly about the meaning of individual words. When we talk about computational semantics, then we want to compute language meaning from word meaning. So it's more like you already have the meaning of each word and you want to compose the meaning of a sentence. And you also want to know what we want to know now is how do we represent this meaning. All right, so there are two approaches to language meaning. The first one is something that we touched upon in the previous lecture. It's usage based. And the whole idea is that, well, if I can represent a word as a distribution over context, then that distribution in itself is the semantics that I'm looking for, is the representation of my word in a semantic space. It has history and connectionist approaches. It is very different from formal semantics, where it's mostly about building lexical resources that describe the semantics of a word. And they use formal meaning representations for words, sentences, and maybe dialogue, discourse, or any kind of larger kind of text. It has history in cognitive science because it deals mostly with how the mind manipulates the symbols, which are the words. All right. I think this is obvious. Why do we need natural language semantics? So we think about natural language semantics as something that bridges in between the linguistic inputs or the text that you are dealing with and the extra linguistic knowledge, whatever is happening in the world as word knowledge. So there is a situation in the world, there is a piece of text, semantics, so you have up to syntax, you can do a lot without understanding exactly the meaning of words. But you introduce semantics because you want to bridge that relationship to, you want to bridge to that extra linguistic knowledge, to the word knowledge. And this happens, as you can see in the examples on the slide, when we are making the jokes, when we are following a recipe, when we are answering an important question, we are always doing semantics. But we also use it to support inference and reasoning, right? So it's not only about doing that bridging, but also we can do reasoning about different parts and how they connect to each other, or when you have different parts and you want to infer a meaning about the whole thing, you can use semantics for that as well. An important question to ask is, do we really need semantics when we're doing syntax? In syntax, as we have seen, we have like words, and these are the surface forms. And then what we can do is that we can add some kind of category here, determinant, noun, and here we can have verb, and here we can have another noun or something. And we can also build a tree that gives us like a higher dimension, a better representation of a sentence. And most of the time, we don't really need to understand the meaning of these words to build this. Because if you have a very good grammar and a good algorithm, then you are able to do this. However, there are specific cases where you have an ambiguity. So the grammar does not tell you which way to go, whether you should have a prepositional phrase attached to the noun phrase or the the start symbol of the sentence, or some verb or something like this. So in these cases that we show here, for example, when we say he read the book with the blue cover, that's one case where you have all of this prepositional phrase here. You don't know if you should attach it to the book. And what would that mean is that the book has a blue cover and this whole thing will be one entity, or you can attach it to read, and then what that would mean is that when he was reading the book, he was using a blue cover, which means that a blue cover is a tool that you can use for reading a book. Semantically, or because thanks to our knowledge of the world, we know that there is no such a thing as a blue cover as a tool that you can use to read a book, which is why we think or we know that this relation here is senseless. So we should attach with the blue cover to book. Same thing when you say, last night I shot an elephant in my pajamas. Same thing when you say, he saw the hell with the telescope. Right? All of these examples require world knowledge. So even if you start building from the lexical level to syntax to semantics, sometimes once you have the semantics, you can feed that back to syntax to do better syntax. All right. Another case where semantics are necessary is when you're doing translation. So for example, in French, the word avocat can stand for two things. It can stand for individual or it can stand for lawyer or attorney. So l'avocat général is like general attorney, but if you don't understand that this word has two senses, sense one and sense two, then you might, translate incorrectly. All right. So if we have different senses of the word, what we can say is that, well, maybe, or not maybe, sometimes we use the same word form to refer to two different concepts. For example, when we use the word bank, it is the same surface form, B-A-N-K, but we can talk about a bench on a river, or we can talk about a financial institution or a storage facility. It depends on the context in which we're going to use this word. Same for the word mouse. You can use it for animal to denote an animal or a computer accessory that you use to move the mouse scroller on the screen and operate. In the same way, when you are using an adjective like bright, when you're talking about a bright light, it's not the same thing as a bright idea, right? It's not the same thing as a bright student, and it's not the same thing as a bright future. So the same surface form bright has different senses depending on what context we're going to be using it. We say, we denote as a lexeme this pairing of a surface form bright and a sense. Okay, so when we use bank as a financial institution, these two things together form a lexeme. And this is a word that we're going to use in a minute to define something else. All right, so let's go and define a glossary of relationships in between words that we're going to find very useful later when we talk about WordNet and word sense disambiguation. All right, so let's talk about, for example, about homonymy. And you will see that homonymy is a little bit problematic when we talk about polysemy, so sometimes it's hard to distinguish in between the two. So we can talk about homonymy when we have multiple unrelated concepts. So this is important. Unrelated concepts correspond to the same word form. So here when we talk bank, and we are talking about the bank of a river, as we said, which is a bench on a river. And when we talk about financial institution, these two concepts, the bank on the river and the financial institution, are they are unrelated to each other, yet we can refer to them using the same word, bank. In the same way that when we talk about bass or base, is the same word, but bass is one, bass is a fish, and bass, which is written in the same way, is a musical instrument. All right. Similar but not similar, we have polysemy, which is now we have multiple semantically related concepts, so now they are related, but we refer to them using the same word form. So when you talk about bank as financial institution versus bank as a building, the same building that the bank is using, so these two things are semantically related, and when you refer to them as bank, then you are using bank as a polysemous word. And then if you use wood as material that the trees are made of versus wood as a forested area, they are very related to each other again. So we can say that wood is a polysemous word, and we're not talking about homonymy. There are some few examples in the literature where it's hard to tell the difference. Like that is the same word. This is the same word that you are using in different contexts to mean different things, but hard to tell. It is hard to tell if it's polysemy or homonymy in some specific cases, but generally if you use this rule of related, unrelated, you should be fine. All right, so metonymy is a subtype of polysemy. So metonymy is that you are taking a word, as always we say, hey, we say here, one aspect of a concept, and you use it to refer to other aspects of a concept. So for example, in the case of bank, we use it to refer to the building or to the organization. Sometimes you use chicken to talk about the animal or the meat. And sometimes, for example, you use the word dish. If you say, oh, this was a nice dish, you certainly don't talk about the plate itself, but you're talking about the food that was in the plate. But you are kind of borrowing that aspect of a concept to use it as another aspect of a concept of another concept. Okay. There is also another important word is zugma is when you have a single word, and this word is related to two parts in the sentence, and it means a different thing for each one of these parts. So, for example, when you say, "Does United serve breakfast and JFK?" The meaning of serving a breakfast is very different from serving JFK. So this is called zugma, is when you are using this word that you know has different meanings, but in the same sentence you use it in two different senses. Here you say he lost his gloves and his temper. You know that losing gloves is like you physically don't know where the gloves are, but losing temper, somebody is losing his temper is not, he's not physically, he doesn't know physically where his temper is. It's rather a different thing where you are acting, you know, irrationally or something like this. Okay, so this is called zugma. There are some other semantic relations that we're going to introduce. So the first one is synonymy. So these are two lexemes that share a sense. So for example, you have couch and sofa, and you have car and automobile, water and H2O. They don't have to be exactly the same thing, all right, to call them synonymy. But if they can substitute each other in a sentence, then we can synonym. But please, we're going to talk about it again, but please note that synonymy is a relationship in between lexemes. It's not a relationship in between words. Okay, so we're going to reiterate that in the next slide. Why is it not a relationship in between words? So for example, you have how big is that plane? You can replace it with how large is that plane, because when you are talking a big plane and when you are talking about a large plane, these two lexemes, the lexeme of large as it is used in this sense, okay, and the lexeme of big as it is used in this sense in this sentence, these two things are synonyms. However, if you say she was like a big sister to him, now big is used in a different way, and these two lexemes are not synonyms anymore, and you cannot say she was like a large sister to him. Okay, so remember that it's two lexemes are synonyms, it's not two words. Then you can talk about antonyms. So two senses are opposites to each other with respect to a specific feature. So most of the time you have some kind of scale on which these things are put. And for example, in the case of dark, you have dark light, which are levels of luminosity. So you are on the scale of luminosity. You have short, long, you are on the scale of length, hot, cold, temperature, rise, fall, direction, front, back, relative opposition. All right. Then you have hyponymy. This is a very important concept. It comes back again and again in NLP. So you have you have one sense that is more specific than another. So dog is more specific than mammal. So if I talk about a mammal, I am talking about, if I'm talking about mammal, I am talking about a set of beings that is larger than the set of dogs. So dog is more specific. And if I say a specific type of dog, let's say Rottweiler, so Rottweiler is even more specific to dog. So Rottweiler is a hyponym to dog, and dog is a hyponym to mammal, and mammal is a hyponym to animal. So you can already see that this is kind of like an ontology that we are building here. In the same way, we can say that disc is a hyponym of furniture and sprint is a hyponym of run. So this is going in this direction. Hyponyms, if you take the other direction, you're talking about hypernymy. So mammal is a hypernym of dog, and animal is a hypernym of mammal, right? So basically what we are trying to do is that we have is-a relationships, and if you have is-a relationships, then you can put them in a hierarchy, and you can have something like this. So you can have animal, and under animal you can have many things, and one of them is mammal. And under mammal, you can have many, many things, and one of them could be dog, and under dog, you have other things, so on and so forth. Okay? So this is the relationship of hyponymy, hypernymy. If you're going up, you're looking for hypernyms, hyper. If you're going down, you're looking for hyponyms. Okay? So dog is a hyponym of mammal. Mammal is a hyponym of animal. All right, this is very important in the case of entailment. Entailment is when you have two pieces of text and you want to infer whether they talk about the same thing. So the woman ate spaghetti with cheese. If I replace woman with person, which is a hypernym. If I replace ate with consumed, which is a hypernym. Spaghetti with pasta, same. Cheese with dairy product, and I have the person consumed pasta with dairy product. You can still tell that they are the same thing. Okay, you can imagine this as being a problem in other things, like for example, if you are searching in documents and somebody is searching for all documents that talk about pasta, but let's say that you have a document that talks about spaghetti, it never mentions pasta. If you don't have something that tells you that pasta is actually a hypernym of spaghetti and there is this relationship, then you're not going to look at that document. You also need to understand that they are in what direction, who is the hypernym of what, because if somebody is looking for documents of spaghetti, you don't want to pull all the documents that talk about pasta. All right, so you have to watch for that. This comes a lot in information retrieval when we talk about query expansion, which means that I take the query of the user and I try to expand it in a way that I can increase the visibility of the document that contains the information, but I have to expand it in the right way. So if I include hypernyms, I'm gonna drag in a lot of noise. If I include only hypernyms, I should be good. Okay. All right. Finally, for this video, we have meronymy. Meronymy is when we talk about parts. All right. So a leg is a meronym of chair, and a wheel is a meronym of car, and a cellulose is a meronym of paper. And if you go in the other direction, then you're talking about holonymy. So a car is a holonym of wheel. All right. And let's jump to the next video to talk a little bit more about resources that help us organize this information using this glossary that we talk about.